Hey everybody, this is Erin Holsted, and she is a counselor at Bridges of Grace Counseling. Erin, did I call you by the right title, counselor?
I'm a licensed independent social work supervisor, but I do clinical counseling. So yes,
So what should I call you? Erin?
Erin is great.
Well,
Not late for dinner.
tell us a little bit about your background and what area of counseling you specialize in.
Sure. So I am, as I said, a licensed independent social work supervisor, which means I have a master's degree plus years of experience plus state boards, which allows me to provide clinical counseling services, including assessment, diagnosis, and treatment of behavioral health issues, and to provide counseling, as well as to supervise dependently licensed folks in the profession. So I've also worked as an adjunct professor for a social work program, doing some adjunct classes for Kentucky Christian University in the past.
Okay, thank you. So you have experience helping people. That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, like 25 years. I've been around for a minute.
Okay, excellent. And on your website, it says you specialize in a couple of areas.
I do. I work with folks across the lifespan. I've worked with clients as young as 8. In this practice, worked in the past with clients as young as 4. My oldest client to date has been in their 80s. But my areas of specialty are anxiety, depression, trauma, and life transition. So dealing with things didn't go like I thought they were going to, whether that is the loss of a loved one, or of a marriage, or of a job, or the loss of health, with regard to things like chronic illness, those kinds of issues.
I'm glad you brought that up. One of the things we mentioned right before we started recording is you ask, are we talking about grief that is just loss with a death, because that's what we usually associate with, or something more? Why do we only usually use that word loss when we're talking about a death in the family? What else can it cover? You just mentioned it, but tell me a little bit more about that.
Sure. Well, as a culturally in our area, when you think about grief or loss, you think about the loss of a loved one. Back in the day, we mourned for a year, we wore black, we didn't go to social functions. That was kind of, the thing that let everybody know that we were in mourning. And then when that year was up, we were just supposed to magically move on with life. And grief doesn't really work like that, which is why I think that social construct went by the wayside to a degree. But there is still kind of that expectation that there's a period of time in which people have to deal with their loss and recover from that expectation that things were going to be different than they actually ended up being, and then be able to kind of move through life in a different way than what they expected. So now we understand grief to be much more broad. Grief can be because for any life transition, things didn't turn out like you expected them. And so grief now is considered a much more broad term than historically we've seen it just associated with death.
Well, when you say, hey, we're defining it a little bit more broadly now, would that be some of the reason why I keep hearing in the news that people are experiencing higher rates of anxiety recently, because we are identifying it in a more broad term? Or are people actually experiencing higher rates of anxiety? And tell me what you've seen over the last maybe 4 or 5 years. Have you noticed a spike in anxiety or grief or a life transition not going like it's supposed to? Have people, I'm trying to put this in the right way. Tell me what you've seen.
Fair enough. So when I started my career 25 years ago, the stats were 1 in 10 of us in the course of our lifetime would be diagnosed with a mental health diagnosis. As of about let's say 10 years ago, it was more like 1 in 5. So over in 15 years, it doubled. And then post-pandemic, they're expecting the numbers when the research comes out to be more like 1 in 3 of us. So about 30% of the population is dealing with something at any given time. I think a couple things contribute to that. I think we live in a fallen world where things are stressful and hard sometimes. And not sometimes, it's hard at some point for all of us. So I think that times have changed. I also think that awareness has changed. We understand a little bit more about how the brain works and how our bodies work. And we are able to share life experiences more openly than we have in the past. And so people don't suffer in silence as much perhaps as they used to. So I think that all those things kind of contribute, the changes in our world, our life experiences, and our willingness to share those with others has resulted. So I don't think it's brand new that these issues, if you look in scripture, I mean, David had a lot to say about, feeling depressed and hopeless and anxious and worried and grieved. And so this is not a new problem, but the way that we talk about it and our awareness of it has changed.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. I'm glad you brought up the Bible and David speaking to that in the Psalms. Over maybe 65 or more of the Psalms are dealing with lament, dealing with loss.
Absolutely.
And there's a pattern that can be found there. It's called lament. And basically it follows four-step process in the prayer. It's we turn to God, we direct our attention to him in prayer, or we direct our attention to him at the very minimum. And then we complain to God, maybe describing, what we're going through, what the suffering we're feeling is. And then we request something of God. And that shows a dependence on him, but it maybe is like, God, I want you to get me out of this mess, or change or help me. And then it ends usually with an expression of trust or praise where we dwell or meditate on God's faithfulness and his goodness. When you hear those terms, can you speak to how important it is, first of all, and then we'll come back to lament. Is prayer important in helping recover in grief? Is going to church or engaging in church important in recovery? How important is it to be in a group? So those are all three things like we focus on in our church. We say, hey, we want to learn to pray and not just pray sometimes, but actually become a praying person. We want to be in a group, small group, Sunday school class, and we want to engage in a Sunday morning worship experience. How important are those in our recovery from loss?
Well, as a Christian, I have really strong opinions about that because I think that prayer is integral in our recovery. The reality of it is, living this side of heaven poses challenges because we live in a fallen world and we are not capable or able to do what God can do. Therefore, it would make sense to appeal to the one who can when we cannot. So I would say not only that, but it also allows us to express our recognition of our struggle and our inability, and also to profess our belief in his ability to do what we cannot do on our own. So I think there are a bunch of reasons why prayer is really important. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is that I do think that we are made for community. God, in fact, instructs us to have community when he says, don't neglect, being together regularly. And he encourages fellowship. And there's a reason for that, because one of the things that we can struggle with is when we're facing grief and loss of any kind is that we feel alone in our loss, and that no one understands. And that makes sense because it's such an overwhelming feeling, and we can get really stuck there. And so having community, one, sometimes can help us feel like we're not the only one, because we're not. And two, can also have someone, a trusted someone who is a believer, being able to speak truth over us when we can't see it or hear it for ourselves. So to remind us of God's goodness, his faithfulness, when we can't even process. We may not even have words, but they can remind us of God's goodness and his faithfulness and his deep love and care for us in our hurt.
Oh, that's incredibly powerful. Thank you for that. You mentioned a couple of things like just now. You said, "Hey, we may not be able to see that, or we may not be able to see the truth, or we might be missing it, or maybe our grief is maybe blinding us." You didn't say it that way, but that could happen. And I didn't ask you this ahead of time, but so tell us why it may be important to see somebody who's in the professional setting that has training like yourself, that has experience, to be able to help us see some of those things we wouldn't recognize otherwise.
Sure. So most people, particularly in this area, wait to come and see a professional person. Sometimes, to be honest, Dale, they wait a little long. They wait too long. And so it usually, when folks come to see me, they have used all of their natural supports. And by natural supports, I mean their family, their friends, their doctors, their loved ones, their church family. They've used all their natural supports, and they're just not able to cope for whatever reason. And so at that point, when it's gotten really, really bad, right, then they'll come and seek counseling. So I always encourage people not to wait until they're in the pit, or until they're barely breathing, and to come and see a counselor. Not everybody comes to counseling for forever. Like, the goal of counseling is not to see people endlessly. The goal is to identify what's going on, and then to help create strategies and supports in place so that they can move forward and somehow reconcile these things that have happened in a way that doesn't keep them from joy in life. And so I'd encourage people, if they are struggling and they have done everything they can think to do, to not just keep being stuck, because they don't have to stay stuck. That's what counseling's for. And counseling doesn't carry the same amount of stigma as it used to carry. People are recognizing that their mental health is just as important as their physical health. They don't mind going to the doctor, but to go see a counselor was a big deal. But more and more, especially amongst people who are connected in the community, they find that counseling actually is a blessing instead of something that only certain kinds of people do. So, and of course, in Scripture, it encourages us to seek counsel when we don't know what else to do. So it's a biblical concept as well.
You answered some of this just now in your response, but walk me through what would it look like if I showed up and I made an appointment with you, and I'm struggling with grief and loss. What would the first couple of appointments look like? What would be I come into your office and then what?
It's a great question. So, and this should be true for pretty much any counselor's office, so just not mine. But the very first thing we would do is have a consultation phone call, so that I know that I'm more likely to be helpful to you than somebody else I know, right? So, because I want to get people where they need to go, whether that's with me or someone else. So, but if you end up scheduling with me or whoever you see, then the first step would be to do a full assessment to determine, for example, if we're talking about grief and loss, is this bereavement a complicated bereavement, meaning bereavement that's extended and you're just really, really struggling? Has this developed into a clinical depression, or is there some other kind of clinical need going on that maybe wasn't previously identified because you could cope well enough, but this particular loss has really knocked you off your feet? And part of the reason that you're struggling to get back up is because there might be some kind of clinical thing going on with your mental health that needs addressed in order for you to be able to be healthy enough to move through the things that you're having to deal with. So the very first appointment should be assessment. From there, a good counselor would make recommendations based on that assessment, whether there's clinical or not. Not everybody who comes to see me needs counseling, and I will tell them that. If they don't need it, I will tell them. Or if I don't think I'm a best fit, then I will tell them that, and I'll recommend someone else who I think would be better suited to meet their needs. And then from there, the person who's coming in for counseling gets to determine what they want to do because it's their life. And so they can take the recommendations and, file them in the round file if they want to, or they can mix and match. But whatever ends up happening, if they decide to do counseling, it's a mutually agreed upon process. It's not something that's prescribed to you that you have to accept, just carte blanche, but it's also on the flip, driven by the counselor or by the client themselves.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very helpful. I think you're right about the stigma going away, or has been going away for quite some time, but I think there's still some hesitation. Like, I'm not sure because I've never done it before.
Sure.
So that's so helpful.
You can see in my office behind me, I do have a couch, but nobody lays on it.
Oh, okay.
So, I think the cartoons from old days, with somebody sitting behind someone on a couch talking about their mother. Anyway, that doesn't really happen. We sit up, we have, regular conversations, but they're just clinical in nature, versus chatting with a friend. So because the work in counseling looks different, or should look different than just talking with a friend, right? Because otherwise you could just talk with friends.
And is talking with friends helpful?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, we need people. We're created for community. And so I think it's important to have trusted others in our lives. We don't have to have a great number of them, but we do need one. And for some people, especially in particular circumstances, it can be hard to have friends, or to make friends, particularly in adulthood or older adulthood. It can be really tricky. And so sometimes people will seek counseling because they really don't feel like they have someone else. But that should be part of a healthy treatment plan for someone. If they are really isolated, is to help them create those connections in their regular lives. Because again, counseling's not meant to be forever. And so building those supports into their daily lives would be important.
So let's say I have a friend that's going through a loss, and
Sure.
what could I do? What do you recommend I would do to help that person? I know when we talked on the phone the other day, you said, yeah, help them without saying something stupid. Yeah, I don't want to say anything stupid. And sometimes I even hesitate even saying anything because I don't know what to say. And I definitely don't want to make it worse. And if I can help it, I don't want to sound stupid. What would you recommend for me or anyone else trying to move into somebody's life and say, hey, I notice you're grieving here. Have you thought about this, or how can I help?
I think your second question is probably the most important one. First of all, you make the observation that someone is hurting, and then you meet them in their hurt. So you acknowledge, I am concerned. You've experienced a loss that I know about, or I've seen a change in you, and I just want you to know I care about you as a person. I love you. I want to help, but I'm not sure how to help. What can I do to support you because I care about you as a person? Sometimes people won't be able to answer that question, Dale. If they're really, really hurting, they don't know what they need. And that's okay that they don't know. That's when you check back and you say, hey, a few days later, I was thinking about you. I was wondering how you were doing. If you feel up for a phone call or a text, that'd be great. If, can I take you out for coffee? Can I drop off some groceries? I saw this really wonderful thing called grief groceries. But it was literally like things like, in the Midwest, we bring casseroles. That's what we do. If all else fails, some like baked spaghetti or some kind of casseroles with noodles or mashed potatoes. I mean, 100%. That's what we do. Yeah. Absolutely. 100%. So, and there's not throwing shade at the casserole. I'm from the Midwest too, but you can only eat so much casserole, right? So doing something like dropping off grief groceries, toilet paper, paper towels, paper plates, because the person may not feel like doing dishes, things that would be very, very practical, boxes of Kleenex, or that kind of thing, or asking, can I pick up groceries for you? Can I make a grocery order for you? Or if you want to make the grocery order, can I pick it up for you and drop it off at your house? I know I was working with someone one time and they were talking about how surprised they were because someone from their church showed up to mow their grass. It was they just mowed the grass. They just came and they did the trimming and they mowed the grass. And it was just such a relief for that person to not have to think about that on top of everything else they were trying to manage.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I just want to let everybody know I'm grieving right now. And if anybody wants to come mow my lawn, I'm experiencing extreme loss and the grass is tall. That's really good advice. I liked I think what I heard you say, and make sure I get this right, ask how I can help. And then if they don't know, it seemed like you were saying, okay, give them a little space but check back in. Hey, I want to check back in. Have you had time to think about how I could help? I just want to make myself available. And then go on and take some initiative to bring them something that says you care about them, whether it's a casserole or a grocery pickup or it's tissues, just to let them know that you're still available.
Absolutely. I mean, the reality of it is some people need space to grieve, and there's no timeline for grief. So it's not like, well, really, the first month is hard, but a lot of people experience a lot of numbness and disorientation during that first month. And so, sometimes they can't articulate what their needs are, or they don't even know because their life has changed so drastically that they're like just trying to put one foot in front of the other to get through the day, particularly if there are children involved, or if they're having to do elder care or care for somebody who's had a change in living circumstances. So now they're traveling to the hospital or the nursing home, every day or every weekend, or the family's having to take rotations to care for somebody in their home. There are a lot of pieces and parts. And so sometimes those challenges make it hard to even know what you need in the moment when grief happens.
Yeah, thank you so much. Our time is just about up. And thank you for sharing. This has been so helpful to me. I actually have about 1,500 more questions, and some of them are even longer. But can we end on this one? Why are you called Bridges of Grace Counseling?
So the concept of Bridges of Grace is not my own. So when I was thinking of a name for my private practice, I was considering a bunch of different kinds of names, but I liked the idea of a bridge because it takes you from where you are to where you want to be. And at the Hillsborough Church of Christ, which is where I attend, they adopted the idea of bridges of grace that bear the weight of truth. And so I just shortened that, talked with the elders if I could steal it, and then adopted it as the name of my counseling practice.
Yeah, I'm going to use that in a sermon. I'm not going to tell anybody I stole it from you.
Well,
you stole it from your church. Yeah.
Plagiarize away.
Well, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing today. I'm going to end the recording. Just real quick, how can people contact you if they wanted to make an appointment with you?
Sure. So I have a website which needs some updating, disclaimer. So at www.bridgesofgracecounseling.com. Also, that's probably the best way. I also have a listing on Psychology Today, which has contact information as well. I also have taken another person on in my practice. So actually I have a colleague here at Bridges of Grace. Her name is Dawn Harriman. And so Dawn comes to the Hillsborough area with a large and very interesting life experience. But she specializes as well in these same kinds of things, as well as doing marriage work or marital couples therapy. So So you can, find that information online, or you can ask Dale for my phone number.
Oh, for sure. It's okay to pass out your phone number. Got it.
Sure.
Well, thank you for sharing. I'm going to stop the recording, and I just really appreciate your time.
All right. Take care. Thanks.